said that.
Sorry for that, Johan. It won't happen.
So other parties were allowed to comment on these on the complementary information, and SSM they said to the government that their conviction was strengthened by the new information. The SSM actually had some KTH researchers review, and they were quite negative in their review, but there were also two other reviews that were more, that didn't say very much else, plus or minus. So SSM anyway stated to the government that they thought that it was even more safe now after this new information. The Swedish Council for Nuclear Waste, they said that there may be problems with the copper, and this may show that the concept does not work. So they flagged that there were issues here. And then the research at KTH, of course, were very critical, and they were joined then by the SSM corrosion expert that had said that was opposed to SSM, saying yes, he left SSM after that, and then he joined these researchers in their criticism. Decision making is difficult for a government under these conditions, and much of the discussion was stalled during 2020. But during this time, there were copper corrosion results from two newly retrieved experimental projects from the LUT experiment, and they were hotly debated at SKB, did not publish all corrosion results. I will not go into this into any more detail, but there is some slides, extra slides attached at the end of the presentation. What happened was that in 2021, the discussion about nuclear power and nuclear waste management was becoming increasingly politicized. So the more conservative right-wing parties were raising nuclear issues as a climate policy, and also then the repository waste issues had risen to the very top of the political agenda at this time, which was something that had not happened before. During all these years, all parties were basically agreeing that we have to solve this problem of the repository and so on. But now it became a political controversial issue. And the government had since 2018 been a Social Democrat Green Party minority coalition, and there was a Green Minister of Environment, and he was reluctant to approve any repository. So there was a lot of pressure from the politicians and also from the industry during the spring and summer of 2021. And also the copper corrosion discussions went very hot in the autumn of 2021. And the Swedish Council for Nuclear Waste, they really stated strongly that more research was needed. But they also said that perhaps this could be done after a government decision. So in November, December of 21, there was a political turmoil. It was not related to the waste issues, but to the budget process. But the result was that the Green Party left the government. And this opened up for the Social Democratic Minister of Environment that was newly appointed to promise a decision on the spent fuel repository on January 27th. So on January 27, 2022, the government approved the repository for spent fuel in Forsmark and the encapsulation plant in Oskarshamn. And in the decision documents, it almost exclusively relies on statements from SSM and this holistic multivariate perspective that the repository had the prerequisite to be safe. This decision was appealed by the Swedish Society for Nuclear Conservation, MKG, and others on April 27th. There was a 3-month appeal period, and on the last day, we sent in the appeal. It goes to the highest administrative court, which is a kind of a constitutional court, and it's a judicial review. So it actually, it only tests whether the government has followed the legislation. But we really wanted to know whether there was enough knowledge about the long-term copper canister, because there's a knowledge criteria in the environmental code compared to this multivariate barrier holistic perspective of SSM. And we also pointed out that maybe there was not enough knowledge about how the other barriers work. The clay buffer, for example, may not work properly if the copper is corroded. And the rock buffer, the rock barrier is very good in Forsmark. There are very few cracks, but of course the rock barrier is not better than the tunneling systems that are filled with clay. So if the water flows through the tunnels, then it doesn't matter how good rock you have. And we were saying that it looks like there's not enough knowledge on these other barriers of how they work. In addition, we asked about the precautionary principle. Has it been implemented? So the future here. Well, first of all, if the appeal is rejected, which is actually likely, I think the environmental lawyers at the Swedish Society of Nature Conservation, they say we have a 5% chance perhaps of being successful here. And in that case also, the government can take a new decision. It can reword its decisions and make a new decision. And because we now have a very pro-nuclear government, they will very likely do it, take a new decision instead of, but we don't know what will happen. It's a very open issue, I think, if the appeal is actually successful. But if it's rejected, which is likely, the next step is that the environmental court has to take a final decision on the license and on conditions. And this, because there are a number of appeals possible here, it will take a number of years. So we may have a construction start in 5 years, an operation in maybe 15 years, because there is a kind of 10-year construction period foreseen. If you compare this to Finland, there is actually a slide on Finland also that I will not show. The Finns are now waiting. Posiva, the company in Finland, is now waiting for an operational license. They have applied for an operational license. And if they get it within a year or so, they will start operations maybe in 2025, it looks like, with the same system, the copper canisters and everything. What is important, perhaps important, is that the government in the license decisions stated that research on copper corrosion should be continued and reviewed within the R&D food report process, this review. Now, both the Swedish Council for Nuclear Waste has been stopped. They were shut down by the government at the end of the year, and the NGOs will not have funding in the future, so we cannot continue with this, with a staff and office for MKG. This will be the last year. We'll be winding down the office at least, and exactly how MKG or perhaps other organizations will work with nuclear waste issues is a bit uncertain at the moment. Now, just final slide. Some lessons learned. I think it can be stated that it can be a problem to have all responsibility for R&D for a repository system development with a private entity that is not part of the National Public Access to Information System. It's not only the NGOs that have a problem with not knowing exactly what research is being done and how it's carried out. Also, the regulator has a problem here because it cannot can only look at what SKB is presenting, and it cannot, review how it has been done. It has done some quality control even on copper corrosion issues, but it has to rely on what the company wants to show. I think it's also safe to say that the quality of decision making is improved considerably by implementation of good consultant processes and access to justice systems. I think Sweden, it has good systems. It's not the problem of the systems that if there's a problem, that it's probably more deeper problems that are in play. I think it has been good for the local communities and environment NGOs to have resources to fully participate in the process. For the communities, it's been good for them because they can increase their competences and actually also be critical to a certain extent, even though in the Swedish case, the local communities are nuclear communities with quite high acceptance for nuclear issues. It is of vital importance, I think, that all problems that come up in the decision-making process are fully examined as far as possible and as early as possible. Also, this question of whether a repository can appear high, the safety can appear high, but there are a number of assumptions that should not be ignored with the argument that a holistic view allows a repository to be implemented in a multi-barrier systems. This is not very well written here, but the basic problem is that if you have multi-barrier systems and one barrier works perfectly, perhaps the other two barriers do not have to work as well. But if you really think about it, you really want to have the understanding that all the barriers will be working as well as possible. And yes, finally, there are interesting issues here in the Swedish case involving, I think, projects that become too big to fail, or confirmation bias in knowledge development, or even the question of regulatory independence and the risk for regulatory capture. So that is, I think, the last slide. MKG has a large website in the Swedish site, it has all the information about what's happened since 2005, basically, within the nuclear waste, including all the documents from the court proceedings and many of the documents from the regulatory review. And there is an English part of this webpage where there's little less, but there are news articles written. We try to make news articles in English as developments continue. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johan. It was really interesting. We have 20 minutes now to exchange, and some questions were already asked in the chat. I will first give the floor to Gunnar, if I pronounce it well, who raised at least 3 questions. For example, for the long-lived medium-level waste, what is the long time it needs to be stored? You have two other questions. I will be able to give you the last one for CLAB. What is the water flows in the rock? What is the where it is places and risk of leakages? And unfortunately, I was kicked out of the Zoom meeting during the presentation. I missed the first question you raised, but I think you will manage to find it in the chat a bit above. So you have 3 questions basically from Gunnar.
I don't know if you can hear me. There's a little bit noise
sure.
around, you know. Yes,
please.
The first question is not important because you already answered that. That was about the status of the long-lived repository.
Okay.
My second question, or The next question was the closing of the Nuclear Waste Council. What is the effect of that? Because it's just recently been closed, as in one of your first slides. And the 2 next questions were about the CLAP. The first one was, how long time does this long-lived medium waste need to be stored? And the second one is the risk of water flows. As I understand that the water flows is the one which causes corrosion. So this says the water flow, there's a risk of corrosion. If you manage to stop the water flow, or they manage to stop somehow, there's not much risk. So that's last question.
Yeah,
thank you.
I think, well, let's take the council question first. It is very unfortunate that the Swedish Council for Nuclear Waste is shut down. It has been working since the 80s in different types of systems. That has always been like an advisory board to the government, and many other countries have this also. They have an advisory board. in the UK, for example, or in the US. And the council has both, of course, reviewed what is happening on a number of scientific issues, not only natural sciences, but also social sciences. They have social scientists, they've had social scientists. But they've been also creating the possibility for people to meet in fora, in different fora. I think it's a big problem that we lose this possibility, because they have been able to pick up discussions, pick up problems that people want to discuss, the communities or the NGOs or others, and it is going to be. We hopefully something else will come out. I mean, you can restructure things, but I think that hopefully this government or another government in the future will revive this possibility to have this kind of independent advisory body to the government. Regarding club, I was a bit uncertain about what you mean. Club is for the spent fuel. Basically, it's there in these water basins, and SKB says that it can be there for 100 years or more. So there's no real.
Sorry, I misunderstand the club. I meant the intermediate level storage.
Yeah. Okay. So the intermediate level waste. It's now stored. Some of it is from our military program. Lots of the intermediate level long-lived waste comes from, a lot of barrels that are not, people really don't know what's in them and so on. They have to classify them as being long-lived. But also there will be a number of, decommissioning of the reactors. You have long-lived big components and so on. And if the short-lived waste that is an SFR, normally has the most, what you want to put in it is half times of less than 30 or less than 30 years. And that repository then would be like a bit safe after 500 years. The problem is that in SFR, they've put in a lot of long-lived waste, much more carbon-14, much more carbon-14, even plutonium in the repository. So they now have a safety case of 10,000 years, which I think is a safety case also going to be for the long-term intermediate level waste. And likely they will, if they are allowed to implement the KBS repository for the spent fuel, they will probably say, well, now we open up 2 or 3 more tunnels here at 500 meters depth, and there it will be safe to have this intermediate long-term intermediate level waste. Is that answer your question a bit? Hopefully.
Yes, that's fine. There was the other question about the water flows around the low-level waste. Is that safe? I mean, what is this rock? Because it's underwater.
It's a problem. There's a lot of water in the SFR. You can go down there, and there's water flowing all the time along the tunnels. It's all pumped up, and it is then, of course, monitored and so on. But its active pumping has to be done all the time for SFR, for the short-lived waste, and they have had some problems also of corrosion, because there is electricity connection to Finland, an HVDC, high voltage current connection to Finland, or actually there are 2 of them, and this means that there are leaking currents in the ground, which possibly is now corroding the stuff that is deposited in the SFR. This has not really been examined. The SKB says there is no problem with this. When you close the repository, it's filled with water, and there is not very much to prevent the waste from going out. Now, SKB says that the hydrology is such that it will take a long time for the water to reach out into the Baltic. But there are other problems here. It's possible that these regional groundwater flows have not been taken into account completely, and it may leak much faster. So what we are saying from our side now is that they should never close SFR. They should keep it open and monitored for 400, 500 years and repair it as necessary instead of closing it at all. So, because there is always this water flowing in the Swedish bedrock. And even though the SFR is very close to where they will place the repository for spent fuel, it's completely different geology. So the geology for the spent fuel repository is much more hard granite, which is very compact. And I can talk for hours about this, but basically the bedrock that they found in Forsmark for the spent fuel repository is the crack-free bedrock that they originally wanted, I think, in the 70s when they were looking for the crack-free bedrock, where we had all these discussions about nuclear waste in the 70s in Sweden.
Thank you very much, Johan. You can also ask directly question to Johan and AKG if you have more question. We'll try to get the three last person to speak before ending the meeting. We have Colin who was wondering from the reading, then he was understanding that SSM was quite relaxed about the possibility of copper canister failing. Colin may have other questions. You please ask Colin if you have other questions, and then I will give the floor to Marixel and Jan to conclude the meeting.
Yeah, just briefly, I think as you've already nodded, Johan, SKB seem to be quite relaxed about the possibility of the copper canisters failing in the holistic sense. And also, have they yet published the photographs surrounding the loss experiment on the corrosion of copper canisters in the experiments that they were responsible for?
No, they have not. There are some slides on this at the end, in the end of the presentation after that you can look at afterwards. But the problem was that they did not produce any good results, or rather, not good results, but advanced analysis of the most corroded areas in the LUT experiment. And our understanding was that the understanding of the researchers at KTH was that if they had done so, it probably would have shown that there was such a big problem that they could not get their license. There is still one LUT experiment package in the SP Hard Rock Laboratory that will be retrieved in a couple of years, and we really hope that the regulator will this time do a more thorough review than they did when they took out the two packages in 2019 now. I saw that Mary had a question about the resources. NGOs will not receive any more funding from next year. The communities will still receive funding, but only for information, unless they change the legislation. So they can only work, and there's a big problem for them now because they're having difficulties with the Office for National Debt that is reviewing their applications compared to the SSM, and they're much more strict about what they can use the funding for, because in the law it now says it's only for information. So the community are not very pleased either about the situation at the moment. And the legislation that was suggested by the old government last summer would solve all these problems, both for us and for the communities. But now we have a different government. Who was else?
Jan wanted to take the floor.
Yeah.
Johan, you in your last slide you came with lessons learned, and your voice is always friendly. But the last lesson learned contains 3 extremely important issues. And that's why I said I want to give a reflection and not a question. But if you state that projects that become too big to fail is a lesson that we can learn here, I think that that's an extremely important one. What you have sketched there is Colin already referred to it. At a certain moment, SSM being quite comfortable with one of the 3 important barriers failing. But it is not just one of the 3 important barriers failing while you're implementing the project. It is one of the 3 barriers most likely failing when you're still in the design phase. Now, that is something that I would say normally never would be accepted. And I'm a bit at loss why, for instance, Stuk has accepted it so far without any critical remark, where Stuk would not accept such a thing during implementation in Finland. SSM is, of course, the same case. This is a very important conclusion. The second one, confirmation bias in knowledge development, I think also that is a lesson learned with an exclamation mark behind it. We do see confirmation bias here. And confirmation bias has a negative effect on the safety case. The last one is one that is probably worrying me the most: regulatory independence and the risk for regulatory capture. I would like to see an assessment, a political assessment of the role of SSM here, where we know that SSM in reactor safety is pretty independent and rigorous. We've not seen that same rigorousness in the Department for Radioactive Waste. And the question is why? I mean, if I see this from a bit distance, my impression is ASN in France would never have accepted the case. And then the question comes up, why is that? Why? I think the issue of regulatory independence is so important that in concrete cases like this, if there's any doubt about it, we need to assess what the problem is. It is unfortunate that we now have a government that is not willing to pick up those 3 tabs from these 3 lessons learned. But I do hope that in the near future, we will be able to really learn lessons out of these 3 viewpoints. And because MKG will not be there, my last question is to you: do you see a way in which the NGOs will continue their involvement with radioactive waste in Sweden?
Yes. We have, the thing is that because we have not known about the future of the funding, it has been difficult for us to plan, but we have had all these different scenarios. But now we can focus on this scenario. And the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, they have 200,000 members. There are resources basically available if the society decides to put resources into this. The problem has always been that environmental organizations have all these other different issues. And a member organization like the Society of Nature Conservation, they have to work on what their members want to work on. And that is why the funding was given to start with, because there was a realization that these kind of member organizations will not work on waste issues, nuclear waste issues, because so few may be interested. I think that is a challenge now, to see how the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation can continue this work. it has been successful. Our work from MKG has been successful in the way that the Swedish Society Conservation now knows all these issues, and the environmental lawyers know all these issues, and so on. So to carry on for a few years, at least on the legal level, would be very possible, I think. But I don't know, and I also don't know whether, let's say, in 3 years' time, 4 years' time, we will have a new government that may view things differently. Of course, what happens if the higher administrative court gives us right, and the application falls back down into the knee of the government, that could overturn things perhaps also. But it's a tough situation.
I just want to conclude that we had a setup which has been praised as best practice in Europe for decades. And that setup has been axed.
Yes.
And in cases of nuclear safety and transparency, I think that is a very big loss.
Thank you very much for those concluding words. You may have seen in the chat the comments from Miles, also mentioning other aspects of uncertainties regarding the project, namely earthquakes, intrusion, or retrievability. We may find those uncertainties in other presentation and other project we will be presented. And it was really interested also with the case of MKG. I found to see the uncertainties related to the implication of civil society. So you know now the calendar. Maybe Nadia, you want to give the final word as I see you now, and
Malcolm,
together with Johan.
Malcolm, I can say one more thing, that the issues that Miles have been mentioning, they are also covered by MKG in all our briefs also. And those briefs can actually, many of them are translated on the website. So if you go on the MKG website, you can find translation of many of our briefs where all these other issues are also dealt with.
Okay, indeed, just Nadia, just to comment just this, you can indeed go to the website of NTW. On social media, you will receive the information regarding this, the recording and the presentation. And you will also find other information. For example, we have a webinar on the Euratom Treaty this Monday. So feel free to contact me and to follow the news apart from this webinar series. Thank you, Nadia.
Thank you both, Johan and Malcolm, for organizing this second webinar in the set of 10 we have still to plan. So basically, thanks for all for coming. Keep in touch. Malcolm will send you all the information in advance. And we hope that we also, through this our activities, we will change something for the good. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you very much. Johan, if you may have a second, I saw a question from Gunnar that could be answered. It's quite technical, so everybody can go for lunch. But if you want to answer him on the chat, I think you may be happy. About if there is time.
Oh, in the what's happening in the nuclear power issue, nuclear energy. Basically, the government has started a few different small little projects. They are financing the academia, nuclear academia more. They are changing some of the legislation, or rather starting to processes to change the legislation. They are saying that they will try to force Vattenfall, which is state-owned, to do something on nuclear. And Vattenfall has a project since a number of years, 2 or 3 years, or maybe 1.5 years, to look at SMRs for Vattenfall. The 400 guarantees, it's basically just air. Nobody knows anything about such things.
Thank you very much, Johan, and have a good lunch, everyone.
Thank you, Johan.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.